Did you know that more than 95% of the people that participate in any of the clinical trials are willing to participate in another one? Yes, that's absolutely right. And today in this video, we will be talking about why as to someone will be very interested into taking a part in clinical trials. Hello everyone and welcome to our new segment, Clinilaunch Knowledge Pod. In this video, we will be talking about what is a clinical trial and why is it important. Also, we will be discussing about the journey of a drug as to how it reaches to the point of clinical trials. So what are clinical trials? Clinical trials, also known as clinical research, is the study of health and illness amongst people. It is the way on how we learn to prevent, to diagnose and to treat the illness amongst the people. Clinical trials involve human participants which are both healthy and ill. These participants help us translate the research that has already been performed in the labs into new treatments and medication plans for everyone. Now, why do you think clinical trials are important? Why does a pharmaceutical company have to go through entire process of a clinical trials instead of just launching it for the public? Now let's talk about this with an example. The best example is the thalidomide incident. In the late 1950s and in the early 1960s, this drug was widely used among pregnant women. What was the basic use of this drug? It was to cure nausea among pregnant women, right? But what was the tragedy? That these drugs or this drug in specific caused malformations among the babies that were born through these pregnant women. But there was one hidden advantage of this tragedy. This tragedy led to the understanding of basic toxicity of this drug and also on the molecular development of this drug for the safety purpose of any of the patient's lives. So without clinical trials, we would never know the effect of any medicine on human beings. Before moving on to clinical trials and the entire process, let's begin with the journey of the drug. Let's understand how the drug comes into the picture until the point of clinical trials. Now there are 5 parts in a study of a drug. First being the epidemiological study, that is the occurrence of this or distribution of this specific illness amongst the population. Second being the sample study and the profitability of the drug. Third one being the molecular study of the drug, wherein we will be choosing each molecule and testing with a DNA gene. Fourth one being the preclinical trials. Now in this preclinical trials, what we do is we test the same medicine for the 3 parts as I had mentioned earlier. First one being the safety of the medicine or the treatment. Second being the efficacy of the safety of the drug or the treatment. And the third one being the toxicity of this drug or treatment. If any of these 3 are violated, the drug or the study is cancelled out then and there, and a new molecule tries to be tested upon. The 5th part is clinical trials. Now during the clinical trials, a certain specific protocol is followed, the safety of the patient is taken care of, and also certain research questions are being looked upon. Now let us deep dive into what is clinical trials and the entire process of clinical trials. As you guys are already aware about the preclinical trials and the data that has been gathered, this data is then submitted to the regulatory bodies in the form of an application. This application is known as IND application, Investigational New Drug Application. Once the regulatory body approve of this application, then begins the journey of clinical trials. Remember, all the clinical trials are performed on human beings. The next step in the journey of our clinical trials is finding a perfect site. Now let's take an example of any cancer trial that has been happening. Let's talk about lung cancer. Now, what are the requisites for this lung cancer trial? First requisite or a first step is that we find a hospital which is cancer specialized hospital, or we find out a multi-speciality hospital with a separate cancer wing in it. The second step would be recruiting a doctor who is qualified and is from the same domain. The third step would be to look out for the pool of patients that this doctor has. These are the pool of patients that we will be performing clinical trials on. Now that we have chosen the site, we have chosen the doctor, and we've also decided on the pool of patients, we would be then moving on to the ethics committee or the IRB, Institutional Review Board. Now guys, if you want more information on the ethics committee or the IRB, please comment #Clinilaunch below. I'll be making a separate video on this topic for your information. Now moving back to the topic, let's understand the different phases in a clinical trial. The trials follow a specific set of protocol in which the safety of the patient is taken care of and also some of the research questions are being answered. Moving on to the phases in a clinical trial. There are basically 4 phases in a clinical trial. Let's begin with them one by one. Phase 0 or phase 1, also known as the testing phase. In this phase, the testing of the medicine or the treatment is done on a small group of healthy volunteers. This phase is basically done to test the safety of the medicine and to check any of the side effects that are being caused by the same medicine or the treatment plan. Moving on to phase 2. Phase 2 is also known as the exploratory phase. In this phase, we will be testing on a larger group of people as compared to the phase 0 or phase 1. This time, instead of healthy volunteers, we will be choosing the specific set of patients to be treated on. The next phase is phase 3. It is also known as the confirmatory phase. In this phase, we will be testing the effectiveness of the drug, and also we will be comparing it with a similar or the standard treatment protocol available in the market. Sometimes doctors also use a placebo instead of the real drug to test the effectiveness. Now comes the last phase, that is phase 4. After the approval of the drug from CDSCO, that is the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, this drug or the treatment is made public, and then the principal investigators monitor closely among the certain set of population of people. Now moving forward, let's talk about the participants in any clinical trial. There are multiple members and multiple teams involved in the process of a clinical trial. For example, there's a volunteer who volunteers for the clinical trial as a patient. Then we have the principal investigator, we have the clinical research coordinators, we have the clinical research associates. We also have a member from the ethics community, we also have a member from the sponsorer. Then followed by we have nurses and we have other staffs that are involved in this clinical trial. Now let's focus on the volunteer. What are the eligibility criteria and what is that has to be taken care of before any clinical trial begins. The first and the most important criteria of any clinical trial is the consent form. It is an informed consent form. Now in this informed consent form, we have all the details, all the protocols and all the procedures that will be followed, along with all the risks involved in this entire clinical trial. So it is very, very important that every volunteer taking part in this clinical trial should be aware of. It is the duty of the doctor or the principal investigator to sit individually with each volunteer, have a detailed discussion about this informed consent form, inform the volunteer about the risks involved, about what are the medications to be taken, and also discuss the entire criterion with him. Coming on to the criteria, there are mainly 2 criteria. One is the exclusion criteria and one is the inclusion criteria. Now there are many sub criteria under this. For example, since we are already talking about lung cancer, so there are certain things which we need to take care of. For example, an inclusion criteria would mean that the patient or the volunteer, whoever is taking part in this clinical trial, should be suffering from cancer. Now if it is lung cancer, then the patient should be affected by lung cancer. If it is any other kind of cancer like brain tumor or any other cancer, then the person should be afflicted with this specific disease. We also have other criteria like age, gender, whether or not he is disabled, whether or not he is met with an accident recently, whether or not he is hospitalized, or whether or not he has been afflicted with any disease. Now when we talk about an exclusion criteria, there are 2 types of drugs that we need to take care of. The first type is the concomitant drugs and the second type is the contradictory drugs. Now what do these mean? Contradictory drugs are those drugs which should not be taken along with the drugs or the medication that we are providing to these volunteers, because they may have an adverse reaction or even a chronic reaction on the patient. The patient might even lose their lives. So these are certain kind of drugs that we need to take care of, that we should be avoiding. When we talk about concomitant drugs, these are those kind of drugs that are safe and are supposed to be or can be used alongside the treatment or the medication that we are providing to these patients or these volunteers. For more such videos and in-depth knowledge about clinical trials, please do like, share and subscribe to our channel Clinilaunch.